Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello, and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. This week, I thought I would return all the way back to the beginning of my cult education, cult journey, ex-cult journey, you could say, of critical thinking and what kind of tools, what kind of ideas could critical thinking offer us when it comes to recovering from a cult or coercive experience? What kind of lessons or tools can critical thinking offer us when it comes to navigating our life in a post-cult world for us? You know, when I got out of Scientology back in 2013, my head was spinning. And I'm pretty sure that if you're watching this or listening to this, then at some point you too have experienced something like that. There is a great deal of certainty that cults and belief systems offer us. The world's a difficult, complicated place to get through and to, solve the problems of our lives. And cults and cult leaders and other opportunists and predators out there are all too happy and all too willing to sell you their version of reality and convince you that it's absolutely true 100% of the time when it's really not. You'll find in the big wide world, especially in a post-cult world where you're trying to figure things out, that there are very few certain, solid, complete answers for you. And this is very frustrating. It certainly was for me, at least, from my own experience. I was and have been endlessly frustrated at the lack of solid, concrete, reliable answers that are universally true for everybody when it comes to certain aspects of our existence, of our emotions, of our relationships, and even of understanding ourselves. And I think that there's a lot of value in trying to understand ourselves and in trying to understand the world around us better. I think, in fact, that that's one of the things that draws us into cult situations is an effort to try to understand and get along better with other people, get along better with ourselves, do better in life, succeed in life. That's certainly what multi-level marketing cults are all about, is success, success, success. And there's an awful lot of people out there who are not succeeding in their lives, who are all too happy to sell you the secrets of their success. So there's a lot of messages out there and a lot of conflicting and crazy and confusing systems and methods and techniques and belief sets. And we can find pseudoscientific versions of this where people try to convince you that it's very science-based. We can find religious, philosophical sort of approaches where if you just believe hard enough, if you just invest hard enough in this thing, then your success is assured or your happiness is assured and guaranteed. Absolutely, right? Just give L. Ron Hubbard $1 million and boy, will you be the happiest person ever, right? So what are we supposed to do about this? You know, when we find out by hook or by crook, however it was that we woke up or found out that our cult guru or our spouse or our domestic partner or whoever the abusive personality was in your life, when you wake up from that, it can be really jarring. It can be like, what do I do now? And what do I trust? And who do I trust? And how do I trust? Can I ever trust again? What do I do? How do I know? How do I tell when somebody's fooling me? How do I tell when some system isn't really everything it's promised or cracked up to be? Very few of them are, by the way. but some, some things are better than others. How do we navigate this? How do we get through life and get back to ourselves again? How do we do that? Well, one of the things that I hit on early on was critical thinking, this concept, this subject, this set of tools that you could learn that are called critical thinking skills. And I became very excited by this because it gave me a path that wasn't dependent on some guy or some woman telling me what to think or how to think or when to think. It wasn't dependent on that at all. The critical thinking is a system for you. You use it at your discretion, at your will, whenever you want to. The tools are there for you. And if you want to pound a nail into a wall, you go get a hammer. You could use a screwdriver. You could use your hand. You could use your head. But the real tool to use is a hammer. That's what it's invented for. And if you want to navigate the difficulties and complexities of the world and solve the problems that are presented to you and determine whether somebody's telling you the truth or whether they're curving it or lying to you or trying to manipulate you, then critical thinking are the tools of critical thinking, the tools of logical thinking, of rational thinking, are available to you. They're 100% up. It's voluntary. Nobody's selling these things to you. Nobody is going to make $1 million off of you using logical fallacies. It's something you get to do. It's 100% within your power of choice to do this. And I have always recommended, since I've learned about these things, that these are incredibly useful tools for us and necessary tools, because unfortunately, I have yet to meet a single human being who was born knowing all of this, or just naturally has a knack for it, or just has a gut instinct to always avoid predators and manipulators. I don't think human beings exist who are born with natural critical thinking skills that just armor them up against all of the weapons and nonsense that's arrayed against them in the world, right? There's a lot of people trying to sell you a lot of crap. And there's a lot of systems of a lot of nonsense out there that are absolutely presented as the be-all, end-all of existence, right? If you just believe this, if you just follow this, everything's going to be wonderful for you. Well, that's just not true ever of any one thing. It's just not. It's just not. There isn't any one answer to all of this. Life is too complicated, and we are too complicated. So instead, we have to sort of figure our way through this. And even critical thinking isn't always necessarily these skills, these tools. Being a scientific thinker is another way of describing this, isn't always necessarily the appropriate way to deal with every situation. Sometimes there are emotionally impactful, very fun, very exciting, very interesting, very tumultuous emotional experiences that we have in our lives that critical thinking isn't really appropriate to those situations, right? You're going to go ride a roller coaster. You don't want to be sitting there thinking about all the mechanics of the roller coaster as you're riding it. You just want to have some fun and experience the experience. And it's all in good fun, and it's all rather harmless. But when it comes to the important stuff, when it comes to how to, you're at a crossroads, you have a decision to make. You have to decide whether to trust this person or not. You have to decide whether to buy this car or not. You have to decide whether to join this group or not. You have to decide whether to go on this date or not. These could be important questions that could determine a great deal of your future life. And when we are at those crossroads, we don't always necessarily recognize when we're at them. It would be good if we could. And I think some of us who get burned in life realize that, sometimes these decisions that don't look like they're that big of a deal can be a very big deal for us. So wouldn't it be good if we had a tool set or a way of thinking that we could rely on, that could always give us, that could always have our back? And this is what I promote critical thinking for. It has your back. It's a way for you to think through things more scientifically, more in a more sensible way. And however that's judged for you. You don't have to judge the decisions other people make in their lives are not necessarily sensible from our own point of view. We always look at other people, judge them, think about them, talk about them. So there is no universally right or wrong answer for everybody in every circumstance. It always comes down to you and your situation and your judgment, your emotions, your life. But no matter what the situation is, and no matter what the situation or the conditions of your life are, this way of thinking or approaching things is almost always going to serve you well. So, what I thought I would do today is return to Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan was a scientist and philosopher and science communicator who I believe had a pretty good head on his shoulders. He was a pretty good thinker, and he was a great science communicator. And he talked about critical thinking skills in a chapter of a book that he wrote. The book is called The Demon Haunted World. And as you can imagine from that title, right, he was attempting to talk about the demons that haunt our world, the beliefs, the ideas that live within us that can create prisons of belief. We can tie ourselves down with thoughts, beliefs, with neural activity in our brain, if you will, with agreements that we make with other people. We mutually believe in a set of ideas or beliefs, whether it's God or Jesus or religious at all, whether it's Buddha or Hindu, Vishnu, or whether it's some other system of belief or set of ideas. And some people will try to reduce science and scientific principles down to just another set of beliefs or ideas, but they're not any more than how you would go about building an IKEA cabinet is a set of beliefs. It's not like that. There are methods and tools and techniques of how you go about doing something. How do you fix a car? You don't believe your way into fixing your transmission. You have a set of tools. You use those tools in a very specific way to take things apart, put them back together. Belief is not necessary to this equation, right? It's not part of the picture. You don't sit there and believe really hard that your axle is going to align itself, and then it does. That's not how mechanics work. Mechanics, car mechanics, are a science. It's a set of procedures and techniques that will always do a thing if you do these things, if you do these principles or follow these principles or follow these techniques properly. It will always result in a fixed car. That's a more scientific approach to a thing. Your belief, your faith, how strongly you believe has nothing to do with whether the car gets fixed or not. The same thing applies here with what we're going to go over today. These are not beliefs that I am trying to instill in you. These are a way of approaching beliefs, a way of approaching facts, a way of approaching knowledge, and judging or figuring out for yourself whether it's useful to you or not, how it could be useful to you, and what you could or couldn't do with it or about it. Okay, this is very general. I'm being very generalized right now, but let's go ahead and cover these 10 points from the Demon Haunted World and what Carl Sagan offers as the baloney detection kit. How do you detect baloney? How do you tell when somebody's feeding you a bunch of crap? Other people have referred to this as the bullshit detection kit, and I would tend to go in that direction myself. Baloney is a cute word, but really, how do you detect bullshit? Well, there are ways of doing it. Liars don't always get away with it. Sometimes we can tell just by looking at them or watching their eyes or watching, whether they're sweating when they're telling us stuff. But that's not what we're talking about today. Here we're talking about how to actually figure your way through this and pay attention closely. And what do you pay attention to? Well, a few things. First off, number one, our first point of this, wherever possible, there must be independent confirmation of the facts. All right, so somebody's trying to sell you something. Someone's trying to give you some facts. They're trying to tell you, here is how it is. Okay, maybe it's true. Maybe that is how it is. Maybe that is an accurate reflection of reality, that blue Smurfs come out from, under the floorboards every morning and hide your socks. That could well be a fact. But is there any independent confirmation of that fact? Has anybody else ever seen, observed, recorded, or otherwise been able to prove that Smurfs are coming out from under the floorboards and taking your socks every morning? Or is this just a fanciful idea? Well, whenever possible, when challenged or challenging ideas like this, these little Smurfies coming out and stealing the socks, if possible, try to get independent confirmation. How does this play out? Well, what is one of the first things we do? If I were to wake up in the morning with my wife and I were to look down over the side of the bed and see that my socks were gone and I thought the Smurfs came and took them, I might look over at my wife and say, "Did you see any Smurfs come out and take my socks?" And she, of course, would look at me as though I was on drugs, which I might well be, and say, "No, I've not seen any Smurfs come and take your socks." And so there's no other independent confirmation. I might try to put up a video camera and record my bedroom all night long as I'm sleeping with night vision camera or something, or leave the lights on or whatever, and focus the camera on where my socks are and try to find out where they went that night, right? If they disappear in the morning, where are they going? And perhaps a camera might be an independent confirmation for me that no, in fact, it's my puppy, Benson, who is taking my socks at night, not Smurfs. And so here I am thinking, it's one thing when in fact, independent confirmation might show me something different. So this is our first principle of baloney detection is if at all possible, try to have independent confirmation. 2, encourage substantive debate on the evidence by knowledgeable proponents of all points of view. There are 2 words there in that piece of advice that are very important: substantive debate and knowledgeable proponents. So it's not enough to go talk to a bunch of people who have no idea what they are talking about when it comes to something important. In other words, if you were trying to fix your transmission and you went out and talked to 20 people who don't even know what a transmission is, or how it works, or what it does in your car, or what it does in your car particularly, let's say you have a Prius, your transmission does not operate the exact same way as the transmission in a 1965 Ford Mustang. There might be some differences. So you're going to have to find someone who can give you substantive debate if you're going to talk about or debate or want to get into how your Prius's transmission works. And you're not going to, and a substantive debate means there's going to be some substance to it. Somebody's going to know, there's going to be important things discussed, relevant things. The facts are going to be on the table. We're not going to end up talking about, the flywheel of the Russian M1 tank. That would not be substantive debate when it comes to the transmission in my Prius. These 2 things are not related, even though they might have something to do with transmissions. So you want to have substantive debate on the evidence by knowledgeable proponents, right? People who actually know what they're talking about. Not necessarily experts or authorities, but certainly at least people who are familiar with the topic. I could never debate the merits of Scientology with somebody who came out of the Jehovah's Witnesses and has no clue or concept of what Scientology beliefs are or what they're about. We wouldn't have any real thing to talk about because I'm talking to somebody who isn't knowledgeable about it. We could discuss cult characteristics and we could have a field day comparing and contrasting. But they're not going to be able to debate the merits of the ARC triangle with me, just to use Scientology as an example here. Nor could I have an intelligent conversation about or debate the merits or frailties or strengths or weaknesses of arguments connected with inner secret temple rituals or ceremonies within the Mormon church, because that's not something I know a whole lot about. So I'm not really a knowledgeable proponent of a point of view having to do with secret Mormon temple ceremonies. That's just not my area of knowledge right now. I will learn about that in the future, I am sure. So encourage substantive debate on the evidence by knowledgeable proponents of all points of view. And that's not just Tom, Dick, and Harry, right? That is going out and looking and finding educated points of view, engaging with those points of view, and having some back and forth. That is a more rational, more scientific way of approaching a topic or area. The third point in the baloney detection kit: arguments from authority carry little weight. Authorities, quote unquote, have made mistakes in the past. They will do so again in the future. Perhaps a better way to say it is that in science, there are no authorities. At most, there are experts. And this is a very important acknowledgement of the frailty of human authority or status. When we line up in groups of people, when human beings get together, there is a hierarchy that develops. There is an effort by people to gain status, and there's an effort by some people to not have status. And it sort of lines up or is pushed around so that, one person ends up getting something over on others, or is somehow seen as superior to or an authority over other people on certain things. This is what it is to be human. We do this no matter whether we want to or not, whether we need to, whether we think we need to or not, we do. This is just what happens. Relationships are about this. Marriages are about this. Groups, clubs, activities, churches, work environments are all about this. Sometimes the hierarchy is already established before you even get into the group or get into the activity, and you got to slot in and figure out where you're going to be. Other times you are put in various places or positions, or you're hired into a job, let's say. And here's your rank, here's your status, here's where you fit into this picture. Maybe you can move up, maybe you can't. But that organization, that sort of status hierarchy is going to happen whether you want it to or not. However, just because it happens doesn't mean that people who rise to the top or who gain authority or status deserve it or should have it. We all know of the injustices of, work and play, promotions, or status. There are people who have oversized egos who need to have status, even though they don't deserve it, shouldn't have earned it, somehow end up there anyway, right? We all see this. We all talk about this all the time. But from a scientific or rational perspective, it's very, very important that we not overinvest in any one person or one thing's viewpoint or ideas about something, because any of us are capable of making a mistake at any time. That's, again, what it is to be human. Even the gurus, even the cult leaders, even the spiritual leaders, even the presidents of our nations, even the political, ideological leaders, the spiritual leaders, the people who we assign and give a great amount of status and power to, the royals, the celebrities, the VIPs of the world, every single one of them are human beings first. They were born, they were raised, they learned to navigate the world, and they ended up in a position of authority and power. That doesn't make them a better version of human being than you or me. And they are all too aware of that, by the way. and often will do silly, stupid things to keep their position, keep their influence, even if they have to lie or deceive the rest of us to look good rather than be good. That is a very common failing of human beings. So, recognizing that as a fact is important. And always holding authorities accountable and always side checking, fact checking, looking at being willing again to find independent confirmation as per point number 1 that we went over. There's no problem with that. And people who are real authorities, people who are real experts in the field, will actually acknowledge that they don't know as readily as they will acknowledge what they do know. You can count on experts for a very limited set of facts or information or analysis from their perspective, from their expertise, and we need that. We need that in our society. We can't all be experts in everything, not by a long shot, and especially not in our complicated world. So we must put our trust and faith in certain people at certain times. But let's always temper that with there are no authorities in science. No one human being gets to simply say, this is how reality is, and it is that way. There are no gods among us. There are an awful lot of people who are pretending to be gods among us, though. So that's a little bit of that reality that we always have to sort of lay over this idea of expertise or authority. Number 4, and here's a great one. Spin more than one hypothesis. Okay, if you have an idea for how something is, how something works, why something is a particular way, why this person is acting this way, saying this, doing this, these are the kind of questions that plague us all the time. Why is my kid failing at school? Why is my boss such an asshole? Why does my wife not, say I love you anymore? These kinds of questions have answers. We can find the answers to these, or we can just dream them up out of our own mind and think we know something. These are called hypotheses, these ideas that we spin up, these like solutions to the problems that we face, or explanations for other people's behavior, for our own behavior. Why can't I hold down a job? Why can't I stay constant to my goals? Why do I always have to get lazy on Sunday? These kinds of questions. There are answers to these questions. Often, though, we dream up the first answer that comes to us and go, well, that must be it. Maybe not. Spin more than one hypothesis. It's an exercise you can engage in. What could be the answers? What could be the answer to this question? What could be the reason for this? Let me come up with more than one. Give yourself options, in other words. If there's something to be explained, think of all of the different ways in which it could be explained. Then think of tests by which you might systematically disprove each of the alternatives. What survives, the hypothesis that resists disproof in this Darwinian selection among multiple working hypotheses, has a much better chance of being the right answer than if you had simply run with the first idea that caught your fancy. And that's really using what's called the scientific method in your life with the problems you face. This is what it is to be a critical thinker, is to think like this. To not let your emotions run rampant, but instead to use your rationality to go, okay, this could be the reason why. Why does my wife not tell me she loves me these days? Well, maybe she doesn't love me anymore. That's one answer, but there are possibly others. Maybe she's distracted. Maybe there's some big problem on her mind. Maybe she's concerned about another relative who is dying or is having issues or problems. Maybe she does love you, but she's having an affair for some reason, which could happen. Maybe there's some other thing going on. there could be 100 different reasons why she's not saying these words to you. And your job is to figure out why. Well, spin more than one explanation for that. Don't go with the first thing that comes to mind and then assume that must be it. You're going to be wrong a lot if you do that. And we all do it all the time. It's our natural inclination. Find the answer that makes the most sense to us. That must be it. Well, it's not always it, is it? How many times have you been wrong? How many times have you thought, oh, this is absolutely right? They just, fill in the blank. They're whatever. In fact, it's our natural proclivity to blame other people for things that we would give ourselves a pass on. This is called the fundamental attribution error. It's one of the biggest and most common logical fallacies or wrong ways of thinking that we all engage in. Somebody cuts us off in traffic, they're an asshole. We cut somebody off in traffic, oh, it was justified because, because we know all the reasons why it's okay that we cut them off. But when they do it to us, right? And we go with the first thing that comes to mind. He's an asshole. Maybe. Maybe there's other reasons. Maybe there are other explanations. And it is in our best interest, if we are really serious about knowing things and knowing things about ourselves and knowing things about other people and not letting other people get things over on us. If we're really serious about that, then when somebody's trying to sell us on something, we can ask, why are they doing this? And maybe it's opportunism. Maybe they're a con man. Maybe they actually do have our best interests at heart. That could be a motivational answer. Why are they doing this? Well, here's why they're doing this. And then we can also ask the other question, is this any good for us? Because those are two separate things. People will feed you utter bullshit with the best of intentions. Other people will feed you utter bullshit knowing full well that they are conning you. So their motivation for doing a thing isn't necessarily going to help you, whether it's good or bad. It's what is it they're trying to sell you? Well, let's take a look at this. What is this thing, right? Is it good or bad? Well, let's find out. Let's spin more than one hypothesis. Let's look at this from a lot of different angles. All right. Number 5, try not to get overly attached to a hypothesis just because it's yours. It's only a way station in the pursuit of knowledge, just a step on the road. Ask yourself why you like the idea. That's a good one. Compare it fairly with the alternatives. See if you can find reasons for rejecting it. If you don't, others will. Right? If here you are faced with a choice. Okay, what are you going to do? Well, you think this is good for you. You think this new diet plan is going to be great for you, and you're all set to go invest $300 in a whole new set of food for your kitchen, and you're going to get going on this thing, and it's going to be raw fish only. It's going to be the raw fish diet, and this is absolutely the thing that is going to solve your upset stomach. You got an upset stomach all the time, and you look up what to do about it, and here's an ad for the raw fish diet, and you go, oh, that makes complete sense to me because I love fish, and this is the diet I need to get onto right away. And you fall in love with this whole idea. But is it really the right idea for you? Is it really the right thing for you to do? Well, don't fall so in love with any idea that you're not willing to ask questions about it, that you're not willing to be a little critical about it, that you're not willing to go get other ideas or alternative explanations or alternative ways of dealing with this stomach problem you have. Maybe a raw fish diet's the answer for you, but is it? How can you be so sure? Why do you feel so strongly about this? If we can be honest with ourselves about that one question, why do I feel so strongly about this? Oh, the amount of trouble and money and time we could save ourselves, it would be incalculable. We waste so much of our lives chasing complete fantasies. Delusions. I wasted decades of my life chasing delusions. Delusions that were sold to me by L. Ron Hubbard and by my parents and by other authority figures in my life who I believed. Had I stopped and asked myself, why is this suddenly so important to me? Why is it that I feel compelled to do this? Had I actually stopped and asked myself questions like that before I got involved in Scientology in a serious way, my life would have been completely different and probably a lot much better experience for a number of decades. So these are not unimportant points when I bring these questions up. I hope we can see that these are things that could be life-changing in certain moments in our life. Number 6, quantify. Now we're going to talk about numbers. If whatever it is you're explaining has some measure, some numerical quantity attached to it, you'll be much better able to discriminate among competing hypotheses. What is vague and qualitative is open to many explanations. Qualitative, right? I feel so good. It makes me feel so wonderful. This is so blah, blah, blah. That's qualitative. It's quality. It's what's the quality of the thing? How can we describe the thing? What kind of adjectives can we use to talk about this thing? It's great. It's brilliant. It's wonderful. It's the most amazing, awesome, best thing ever. We don't really know anything about it yet, except that it's got all these amazing words describing it. There's no numbers connected with this. We haven't discerned anything factual. We just have a bunch of words thrown around that describe the quality of this thing. But does that really communicate to us as an individual or as a person, what is this really going to do? Had somebody told me going into Scientology, this is going to constitute thousands of hours of your life to do this bridge to total freedom. And it's going to cost you decades of time and thousands of dollars. Had they put some numbers to this thing, I would have had a very different idea of what I was getting into. But that's not how it was sold. That's not how cults are ever sold, unless you're in an MLM situation, in which case they're throwing false and fake numbers at you. The numbers that they show you are a complete spin. And so even when you get numbers, you still have to have a critical eye. But numbers are at least something better than just, it's the best thing ever. Oh, it's going to make you feel wonderful, right? Quantity over quality could be an important tool of critical thinking. Of course, there are truths to be sought in the many qualitative issues we are obliged to confront, but finding them is more challenging. Yes, right? How do you know whether something is the best or not, or makes you feel wonderful? Wonderful for Joe and Bill and Nancy and Sue might not be wonderful for you, right? And numbers might be able to help, or quantities of things might be able to help give you a better understanding of something. There's another reason why this is a tough one for people, though, and that is that numbers are really hard to think with, and they fool us. We are very, very bad. Our brains are really bad at processing numbers and thinking with statistics and things like that. It's easy to fool people with percentages and numbers. So it requires some real investment and some real thinking to try to quantify things. But I'm trying to show here how it can really debunk all by itself. Just trying to put some numbers to something can debunk complete myths and lies that somebody's trying to sell you or foist off on you. So this is a really good point for baloney detection. Number 7, if there's a chain of argument, every link in the chain must work, including the premise, not just most of them. Now, a chain of logic or reason is, okay, A, therefore B, therefore C, therefore D, right? You have a chain of events or a chain of logic that leads you to various conclusions. And there are so many pitfalls possible if the chain of logic or reason has holes in it. It breaks down somewhere. Well, A is true. B, we're not totally sure about, but if it were true, then C and D, right? Well, okay. But if B is weak, if B isn't really true, if it's not a thing, then how can C and D actually be true? They can't. It breaks down. This is sort of formulaically sort of thinking about this as a formula. That's how it would work. Let's say we start with a premise that a lack of exercise leads to weight gain. If you don't exercise, you're going to have build up too many calories in your body or other factors, and your body is going to convert some of that undigested or whatever food into fat. You're gonna gain weight. Okay, so there's a premise for you, and we can add to that another premise. Weight gain increases the risk of developing heart disease. Statistically speaking, we can look at graphs and charts and show that numerically speaking, statistically speaking, more people are likely when they gain weight to develop a heart condition. That we can see that's a statistical fact. So there's another premise. So we can combine these two things together and we can say, therefore, not exercising regularly can increase the risk of heart disease. It doesn't say that it will, it says that it can increase the risk of heart disease. So this would be a logic chain, premise, conclusion, that makes sense and would be something that you could apply to your life and go, okay, well, maybe I should exercise more. Maybe that's something I should look into. You may or may not fall into that statistical probability of if you gain weight, you're going to develop a heart condition. You don't know. You don't know one way or the other because, unfortunately, this is a little hard to predict. But these are two things that we can fall back on and go, okay, sounds legit. Think it makes sense. Now, let's say you walk into the Church Scientology one day, just as an example of occult recruitment activity, and you take a personality test, and the person sits down with you and says, well, you walked in here because you have a problem you want to have solved, or you have a need you want to have fulfilled. This test here shows, that's premise number one. Premise number two, this test is always right, and it shows that your personality is introverted and withdrawn and out of communication with your environment. And this would be another thing, right? The test is flawless. Okay. That's the first point of breakdown. But and that what it's showing is that you're withdrawn and introverted. Well, maybe that's true and maybe it's not. You'd have to figure that out or see that for yourself. And therefore, the chain of logic continues. You should sign up for the Scientology class, which will absolutely cure that problem you're having. And here we can see a couple assertions being made that are not necessarily true, not necessarily a given, right? They're weaknesses in this chain of logic. You don't know that this test always works. They tell you it does, but how do you know that? How can you prove that? Is there evidence for that? And two, are you introverted and withdrawn and out of touch with people around you? You have to decide that based on your own life and circumstances. Somebody else may or may not be right in telling you that, but just because they tell it to you because it shows up on a test doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So that may or may not be reasonable as an assumption or as a piece of information. And then it goes to, well, if you want to solve this, then if you take this class, then you will solve that problem. Another untested assertion. We don't know if that's true or not. So it may or may not be the right thing for you to do to sign up for that class. But don't think that the reason you need to sign up for the class is because the test is perfect and because you're introverted and because this class is going to solve your problem. These are unfounded, unwarranted assumptions. We don't know these are true at all. So this is an example of where you might find breakdowns in chains of logic or reasoning that might not serve you, right? And it's good to take some time and think about that. All right, point number 8 is called Occam's razor. This convenient rule of thumb urges us, when faced with two hypotheses, two explanations, two solutions, whatever, two hypotheses that explain the data equally well, to choose the simpler. That's probably the one that's going to be right. It's not always true. Sometimes the more complicated, difficult answers or solutions are the real explanation. But most of the time, go with what's simple. It's a general rule of thumb that'll serve you well. Number 9, always ask whether the hypothesis can, at least in principle, be falsified. In other words, shown not to be true. Propositions that are untestable, unfalsifiable, are not worth much. Consider the grand idea that our universe and everything in it is just an elementary particle, an electron, say, in a much bigger cosmos. But if we can never acquire information from outside our universe, it's not that we can't disprove that idea. You must be able to check assertions out. Inveterate skeptics must be given the chance to follow your reasoning, to duplicate your experiments, and see if they get the same result. And this really basically comes down to, can you prove it? That's the answer. That's the question, rather, to any assertion or any claim. Can you prove it? How can you prove it? Where's the evidence? Where's the proof for this? And if it's a question or an assertion or a statement that can't be proven, well, now you have some decisions to make as to whether you want to accept that as true or not. But a good critical thinker would look for evidence, especially for important things that are going to matter to you in your life. If you're going to give a medicine to a child, your child, you're going to want it to work. How can you show or find evidence that it's going to work, or that it's, statistically speaking, has a good probability of working? Well, you're going to need to look at some studies. You're going to need to get some information. You're going to need to get some statistics. Or not. You don't have to, right? Just go with it and cross your fingers and close your eyes and hope it works. Maybe not the best approach. Maybe actually going and seeing whether this question or assertion can be falsified, can be disproven. Can it be? Does that mean it is disproven? No, you got to go look at the evidence now. Just because something is suspicious or something is, maybe shady doesn't mean that it is. There's lots of things that are counterintuitive in our world. There are a lot of things that are very, very true that don't make a lot of sense to us. Quantum physics, for example. Dark matter, all kinds of things in our universe right now that we've tried to use to describe reality and the nature of it are up for all kinds of debate and question within the scientific world based on what evidence can be found or produced, or what scientific experiments or measures can be used or utilized to show a thing. Okay, if I go with the Smurfs are taking my socks every morning, and I insist to my wife that it's the Smurfs are taking my socks, they're taking my socks, they're taking my socks. Okay, how do you prove it? Right? Well, we talked earlier about maybe get a camera, maybe get some evidence, maybe see if somebody else can see it, something like that. But if I say, the reason my wife and I met in the first place was because the Smurfs arranged it. I can't prove that. I can't disprove it either, though, can I? It's unfalsifiable. Maybe there are some experiments or some history or some photos or some something I'm supposed to go back and find to prove that, but it's an unfalsifiable claim in the main. I can't really be challenged on it. I believe it's true. This is how I'm going to assert reality. Is the Smurfs are responsible for my relationships? Go ahead and prove me wrong, right? And nobody can, because it's unfalsifiable. Not that great of a claim. And it's those kind of claims that people are going to challenge you on most. All right? It's just, it's this way because fill in the blank with something that just cannot be proven or disproven. And if something can't be proven or disproven, it's not a point of reality, it's a point of faith. You believe it's true. It may be, it may not be. Cults and abusers and predators specialize in selling you on unfalsifiable claims. This is one of the primary ways that predators get away with being predators, is they say things or assert things as true which can't be proven or disproven. In Scientology, for example, this comes down to thetans. You must believe in a spiritual existence and a very specific kind of spiritual existence, which is that you and me and thee are spiritual entities that do not exist have any aspect of we don't exist as matter, energy, space, or time. We don't have any time. We are not in space. We do not have matter or energy, and yet we exist as spiritual entities. This is the definition of an unfalsifiable claim. Nobody can prove that. Yet Scientologists, in their illogical way of thinking, in the way that they delude themselves in their thinking, believe that not only is it true that they are a thetan, they believe it's a scientific fact. Why do they think that? Because they're told that that is true by somebody who they believe is an authority, L. Ron Hubbard. So that's how silly this can get and how quickly it can get that way. So always, 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 when faced with an important assertion or claim that somebody's giving you, falsify it. See if it can be disproven. All right. And finally, point number 10. The reliance on carefully designed and controlled experiments is key. We will not learn much from mere contemplation. It is tempting to rest content with the first candidate explanation we can think of. One is much better than none. But what happens if we can invent several? How do we decide among them? We don't. We let experiment do it. And this, again, is really getting your mind into a disciplined, scientific way of thinking about things, right? Based on the 9 points above, here we come down to experiment, test, falsify, check, look for evidence, look for numbers, look for statistics, look for information that can prove to you that this is true. And not just one piece of evidence. Okay, good. Find many. See if you can find independent corroboration. See if you can quantify it. All these other points apply. Does the chain of argument make sense? Does every single point hold up? Is it provable? Is it factual? This is what it is to be factual. This is how the word fact comes into our vocabulary, is we can prove it through replication, through duplication, through experiment, through agreement with others they can go experiment, do the same experiment we did, come up with the same results every time. That's how we determine the nature of reality. Cult gurus want to shortcut that every time. They want merely to tell it to you. It's true because I said it, and you better believe it. That's not disciplined thinking, and it's not critical thinking. And it's how we all ended up in the cult in the first place, right, as we bought into that crap. So any of us at any time can let our emotions and our feelings override our rational, prove it kind of thinking. And it's very important to keep ourselves out of these dangerous situations, that we remember and we think to think and not just feel our way through life. We're going to feel our way through life whether we want to or not. So it's really a struggle to do the thinking. That's really the effort here. And I hope that today's episode and these points that I've gone over here from Carl Sagan are useful, informative, and hopefully I've done this in a mildly entertaining way so that you get something out of it. And on that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the show for today. I want to put out there that if you need or want to talk with me directly about any kind of coercive situation or cult situation that might be going on in your life or the lives of your friends or family, you need help, you don't know what to do, you don't know what to say, you don't know how to deal with it, or you're coming out of a cult situation and you could use a friendly ear, somebody who understands, somebody who can give you some advice, some guidance, I'm more than happy to do that. I am not a therapist and I do not practice therapy. I don't pretend to, but I do consult with people. So you can contact me for that via my website or through my channel or email. And on that, I will go ahead and wrap up the show for this week. Thanks for coming around. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.